You've reached the Storied Human podcast, hosted by me, Lynn Thompson. Each week, I share a story, either an interview with someone fascinating or a short solo from me. I love your stories, and I learn so much from them. Hopefully you will too. So welcome. If you are new here, I'm so happy to have you. If you are a returning listener, many thanks. So here it is, the next episode of The Storied Human. Today's interview is with Sarah Moore. She's a life and leadership coach who helps women find the audacity to fall in love with who they are. Born in the U.S., she spent time in England before returning to the U.S., where she went to college and met her husband, Preston. Her new book, Full of Herself, is available from Amazon or on her website, moresoulsessions.com/getmybook. And that's more, M-O-O-R-E, soulsessions.com. Okay, so you left the job and Preston got a really good job to pay the bills, right? And I love that. I think that's an amazing sign of a partner's support. So what happened after that?
I began this coaching journey, Lynn, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. The thing that surprised me the most is I thought I was going to go to learn how to be a coach when I did my training program. And what I realized was really happening was I was being changed from the inside out.
Yeah.
Because in order to learn how to apply these skills and tools, I had to apply them to myself first. And so it was the most wonderful year. I think my years in 12 step leading up to that prepared me just enough to be able to walk through some of the things I learned about myself. And then I also realized, I guess, well, if I want to keep coaching, I'm probably going to need to start my own business, because getting hired as a coach, even today, is very challenging, let alone 12 years ago.
Yeah, it was still kind of new, right? Yeah.
Yeah, very new. I mean, I remember going to networking events and saying, I'm a coach, and people would say, great, what sport? or I'd say, I'm a life coach. And they say, what is that?
Yeah.
I often think that's interesting, because today, rarely, if ever, does somebody ask me, what's a life coach or a leadership coach, or even confuse me for, playing a sport. And I think it's got to be a combination of two things. One, coaching has come some way. And I think that COVID also sped up the focus on mental health and coaching and advanced our industry a few years. And secondly, maybe the part that's more interesting to me is that's got to be a reflection of who I am in the world. I was still so young. I'm still kind of faking it till I made it. I still had some of that. Am I really old enough and experienced enough to be able to help you? Plus, I tended to attract clients who were older than me because I am an old soul. And today, 12 years later, experience is just a wonderful gift. I feel so comfortable in my own skin, and I've had such a varied experiences as a coach that that's just not something that comes up. But yeah, I've committed to growing my skill set and my brand. The thing that's kicked my butt the most is how to run a business skill set to being a coach. Yeah.
I was an English major. I always was terrified of that part of the business. I always loved the idea of having a business, but that part, like the marketing and the sale, it really scared me. I actually have a brother who's a really successful entrepreneur, and he's just taught himself how to be a good marketer. But I don't think most people enjoy that. Like the passion that they start their business with is about what they love to do. And then they have to learn those other things, and it's hard.
I think I'm someone who's hard on myself anyway. That's something I'm constantly unlearning. And so I think I had really unrealistic expectations of what it took to build and grow and how long that would take. So I was constantly feeling bad that I wasn't doing enough, or I wasn't bigger than I was, or my email list wasn't bigger. And actually, in writing my book, I really got to reflect on I've kicked ass. I just didn't know it at the time
Yeah.
because I was at step E, totally arbitrary letter, thinking I should already be at step S.
Yes.
If I could have just loved step E for what it was, everything was a win and or a learning. And in that sense, really a win.
It was so good
Um,
that you wrote the book and were able to look at things, look back on things and
yeah.
learn. I'm very struck by your bravery at all these different points. Like it takes a lot to look at yourself in those ways. And the best coaches do, but that's not an easy journey, that self-discovery and self-examination. Did you find that difficult when you first had to do those sorts of things?
I think it's always come naturally to me to be
Yeah, you were
very
game for it. I was
honest.
going to say.
Yeah. I remember when I was 16 in high school, I went to Costa Rica for 6 weeks with a group of us at school, and we all got a nickname, and mine was Honest. I just didn't know how to harness that honesty. I think that's been the harder journey for me. I think
Yeah.
because on the outside I appeared quite confident and ballsy and let's go for it and doing all these exciting things. On the inside though, I felt quite broken and fragile and unsure. And so I would often use my honesty in a way that didn't bring people together. It sort of created tension. It was more of a, oh, look at me because I want to be the best and I want you to see what I'm doing. And so I've done a lot of work there, maturing into I don't have to prove a thing. I'm worthy as I am. Sometimes it still comes out and I can see it so quickly. I mean, I can feel it in my body, the dissonance, like, oh, that is icky.
Yeah.
And yeah, I love what you said. I think the most effective coaches or sort of, I'm going to say helpers, I don't always love that word, but people who are doing something similar to coaching are those that are doing the work themselves.
Oh, yeah. It
Yeah.
shows. It really does. It shows. And it's not easy, but it makes you, first of all, it's wonderful to just enjoy yourself as a full person, but then to be able to share that. So I have a question I've been dying to ask you. How do you know when it's time to write a book? How do you know that?
I can speak for myself. I knew it was the time. And actually, I think my answer will stand true to maybe anything that we want to do.
Mhm.
Just in this case, it happens to be a book. Is if it was bubbling for a while, I'd envisaged for 20 plus years wanting to write a book. And finally, it came to a point where it was hurting me more than it was hurting me more not to write something.
Ah, yes.
It was like I'd passed a tipping point where I felt regretful or icky that I wasn't working on it, even though I still wasn't sure what it was. And so I think that's a wonderful marker.
Mhm.
And back to my answer to your very first question, we have to be doing the work to be able to have the awareness to know that there's an it or a dissonance or where is the tipping point, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
That
so
awareness of self. What
yeah,
what you said in the very beginning, I just loved it because you said I have a set of practices and I stay consistent and I follow them. And when I don't, I can feel chaotic and I think that's really important for people to understand. I hear it often actually that all of us have these things, all of us fall into these old behaviors. It's just that people that have the practices, like you had said just a little bit before too, that we recognize when we're not there a little more quickly. Like it's not like I'm perfect now, but I see the progress is, and I was talking to a good friend about this. I said to her, okay, I'm a little more enlightened. I think I'm a little more positive, whatever. But I said, really, all I can notice for sure is that I notice quickly when I'm out of sort of calibration. I notice it more quickly. And I'm not perfect, but I grab myself and say, no, let's get back on the path, And what I hear in some of your conversation too is that battle with ego,
yeah,
because when we're young, it's about our ego and about how important we are and about we can never have enough. The ego can never have enough, right? It can never have enough fame. It can never have a big enough house. We can never have enough money. We can never be important enough. Like you said, you were never doing enough. Like that's something every woman I think can relate to. We're constantly pushing ourselves because we're never quite good enough. And that's like the ego thing that I, study a lot and hear a lot about. And I just have to share a wonderful thing that I found through my podcast is, I'm working hard on my ego. It's still, raises its ugly head. But one of the most wonderful experiences I've had with this podcast is I listen back because I'm a talker and I love to talk, obviously. I listen back to the interview and sometimes I'll hear myself talking and it's kind of interesting, but it goes on a little too long. And I just go, nope, that's got to go. And I cut myself out. And I cannot tell you, I laugh when the first time I did this, I laughed and I said, okay, we have made progress because we can cut our precious words out and we get a kick out of it instead of being upset. And you know what's so beautiful about that? Usually I'll talk about, because I don't like think about what I'm going to say next or what you said. I just try to stay in the moment. I think that makes the best interview. And so what happens is I will just go on and on, right? Like somebody will say something exciting and I'll just start talking. But it never is wasted. I cut it out. But the thing the person said after that is usually beautiful. So I've learned such a lesson about humility and about the rewards of working on your ego through the podcast. Isn't that crazy?
It's a tremendously wonderful story. I feel like I'm gonna keep that with me. Oh, I just love like that physical representation of the joy of cutting out your own voice. Two things too that come to mind, Lynn. One is
I love sharing it with you because you get it.
Yeah, totally. The best definition of ego I've heard to date is edging God out.
Oh my gosh, I love that. Oh my gosh. Edging God out. It's so true. That's where you're always going to get into trouble. I hear that in so many different ways. Like when you cut off your connection to source, you cut off your connection to God, you think you know better, you're not connected to the universe or however you define the creator. Then you're mentally ill. Eventually you're mentally ill because you're not connected to everybody else. You're not connected to God. And they talk about that in AA a lot. And it's a really good point. But gosh, I never heard that before. Edging God out. I'm going to have to write that one down and hold that close to my heart. But especially for me, who's always used the gift of gab to make my way through the world, I thought this was such a moment, like such a growth moment.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. Thank you for sharing that with me.
Well, thanks for receiving it. But tell me about the book because it's got an audacious title. I love the energy of it. How did you come to that title? How did you scope out what it would be?
It was given to me. I was talking to a wonderful woman who's a writer and an editor about wanting to write my book. And I was scared about writing the book because I knew I had something to say. I just didn't really know what the shape of it was. And I was talking to her about maybe getting some coaching from her, some writing coaching to help me go. And as I was describing what I wanted to write, which is really a whole bunch of personal stories, my life experiences mixed in with the coaching tools that I love the most and share with my clients, she said, you really ought to call it Full of Herself. And I just went, oh my God, I think I did that more on the inside actually than the outside. And you know what was so lovely about that? We never ended up working together, but she gave me such a gift. And then with my team, I have 3 amazing women who work on the More Soul Sessions team. And we were talking about like, what is our mission? And this was just like foundation building for the brand less than a year ago. Like, what are we about? What are we here to do? And out of me, in a moment, I'd already written the book at this point. And the editing process was well underway. I just wrote this finding the audacity to love who you are. And people have really hooked onto the word audacity that I didn't think much about when I wrote it. I just loved the sentence as a whole,
Yeah.
and realizing that to our last point about ego and how and God and edging God out, that what brings me closest to my spirit and the spirit that's greater than me are these set of practices that we were talking about: journaling, meditation, movement, some kind of breath work, sitting quietly, right? A whole combination of things. When I do those consistently, I am able to find the audacity to love who I am, because there's a sense of flow and alignment. So after we wrote it as a mission statement, I was like, guys, I think this is the subtitle of the book. And so that was how it came to be.
It was meant to be. I just love I love the feeling of how connected it all was. And there's something that I'm thinking about when you do that, right? When you keep those mindfulness practices, and you stay centered, you're able to hear those whispers. You're able to be connected. You're able to be in line. And the most beautiful thing about what you're giving people with this book, in my opinion, is that you're reminding people that you were not sent here. You did not come here as a soul to hide, because that's not being very nice to God. God didn't send you here to be like less than you are. God sent you here to be who you are and to use it to your full ability. And a lot of us run around. I always think of that little Sunday school song. It's called, This Little Light of Mine. That came up so much when I started this journey with the podcast. And we talked a lot about mindfulness. I was in a wonderful class with women, and it was about podcasting, but it was also about having that audacity, having that bravery to move forward. And I kept hearing that because I went to church for a long time when I was little. And it's this little light of mine. I'm going to let it shine. And you say, hide it. All the little kids go, hide it under a bushel. No, I'm going to let it shine. And it just came back to me after all these years, because that's what God or source or the universe, that's what the creator wants you to do. Like, it took me a really long time to figure that out. And I'm really glad I know it now, because you're not supposed to be shy or think you have forever, right? You have gifts that only you can give. And I keep hearing this. I'm so lucky to talk to so many beautiful people that remind me of this. Like, we have to keep on that path of mindfulness and keeping in alignment so that we can be who we're supposed to be, who we really are. It's a beautiful message. And I love you're aligned right there with it. You're right in line with it.
Yeah.
And that's a service, because women especially, they hide, and they're other focused. Still I see a lot of women.
Yeah, really, really, leaning into that and trusting that is the work every day. And I also really believe it with every fiber of my being that I am providing a service. And I think that's what keeps me inspired and keeps me going. I had two little thoughts. One is, I don't know from a copyright perspective, but that song could be your intro or your outro to the podcast. This little light of mine, oh, I'm gonna let it shine. Yeah.
Oh, you're gonna crack up. You know what my intro is right now? It's a totally unique song written for me by my son. It's like a Brazilian guitar intro. Yep, he wrote it just for me.
Oh, I'll have to listen. That sounds
I could sort of weave it in there, but yeah, I love that idea. You're on fire.
Yeah. But I want to say one thing about hiding. Thank you for that gift too. God didn't send you here to hide, or you're not here to hide. When we talk about these practices for getting centered and getting aligned, which I believe in so much, one of my favorite leadership tenets is learning doesn't come from experience. It comes from reflecting on the experience.
Ooh.
It is true that learning comes from experience. The greatest reflection, though, comes from reflecting. And that's what all of these practices are. They're reflecting on, how did I show up? What's going on in this chaotic mind of mine? And how can I sort through some of that so I can make a next decision with greater clarity, which means I can trust myself in the process. And I truly, truly believe that humility, we've got it wrong. We think of humility as sort of being small and being deferential, and it's sort of this quiet, polite thing. And I think humility is big and bold because it's not hiding. It's being exactly who God wants us to be. And God doesn't want us to be small. He wants us to be full, not arrogant, not taking over, not pushing people out of the way, but feeling a fullness, which can look big and confident. It can also look like shy and quiet. And everything in between. And what's most important is that it's a reflection of the truest version of ourselves in that moment. And so that a friend and I sort of came up with that definition of humility, and it rocks my boat. I just love it. And it helps me step into a larger version of myself and take up some space.
So one more question, and I am wondering this. Where did you get this? Like, are you like your mom, like your dad? Was there someone influential, like a grandma in your life? Who do you take after?
Nothing comes to mind. I mean,
Okay.
I've been influenced by those people tremendously. I think my husband is a massive influence. I
It's like
met
it.
him when I was 22. I mean, just a little fledgling.
Yeah.
And I also think what comes to mind in this moment is, I think I've always been very sensitive. I
Yeah.
felt a lot of things deeply. I think both of my parents do too. And also, when addiction is in the midst, that's the first thing to go because it's survival at all costs.
Yeah.
So I think a deep yearning to connect with that sensitive part of myself and love sensitivity. Think of it as a compliment rather
Yeah.
than, something that's negative, has also been a driving force for me.
I love that. Yeah. And sometimes our parents weren't able to be who they were for whatever reason, like you said. And
Yeah.
so, but you're discovering, I can use the gifts that maybe they had that they didn't fully express. What I'm still
Yes.
shocked at, though, is how young you guys were and how wise you were for your age.
Yeah.
Because I got to tell you, honey, when I was 22, it wasn't happening.
Yeah. I'll take it. Thanks.
Yeah, it's really impressive. But a lot of people go through that and don't turn around and help others. So I love it's one of my favorite kinds of stories. You take what you learn and you grow and then you share. Like there's nothing
Yeah.
better, nothing better.
Yeah.
Oh, and I wanted to say one tiny thing about sensitivity because I'm super sensitive and so is someone else in my household. So I did an online quiz and I read some research and it said something really interesting. I love always when there's an anthropological or archaeological reason for something. And the theory is that the sensitive people survived because they smelled the fire first. They heard the enemy coming first. They smelled the poison in the flower first. They were useful. And so however natural selection works, sensitive people kept being born. And so I now think of it as a superpower.
Oh, amen. Amen, sister.
I love that explanation. Is there anything else you would like to share with my listeners? Anything that we might not have brought up?
Something you mentioned earlier about women, especially being other focused. One of the questions I love to talk with my clients about, and I'm using it all of the time, is what do I think?
Yeah.
It's such a simple question, and it's so powerful in the context of, I'm trying to earn your approval, which is the definition of perfectionism. I want you to like me. I'm trying to people please and be a helper, which is so worshipped. and has such an underside that we're not talking about enough. And so I think this question of, well, what do I think about that? And some of the pushback I'll get is, well, Sarah, if I knew what I thought about it, I'd already be doing it, right? I don't know what I think. And I'll say, give yourself the gift of getting quiet enough. This is back to these practices. Something will come through that feels true. Even if it's, I don't know. That's incredible information, because what that means is in that moment, we can let go. We can put it aside because there's nothing to do right now if we don't know. Keep going with our daily lives and then trust that something will pop up in another moment. So I think that can be a great question to start asking oneself, especially if you struggle with people pleasing and looking to others for your sense of self.
I think that's super helpful for almost every woman I know. I know I still fall into the people pleasing thing. And I did read something recently that said, it kind of terrified me actually, because I have had a couple of autoimmune diseases, and I had Lyme disease, and from there I had Hashimoto's. People sometimes get thyroid disease after Lyme disease. So I had a series of diseases. I was kind of ill for a couple of years, and I read that that's connected to holding back your feelings and stuffing stuff down and always pleasing others. And I was like, really? Do I have to face that now? But it made so much sense. So I really feel like a lot of people, sometimes you have to have a little distance from that thing that you went through. You look back on it and you get it. And so for me right now, I'm really getting it. I'm like totally able to see it for what it was, to see a lot of things, just to, several years back, to really look at it in a different way. And so that question becomes important too, because you don't just look at it in this canned way. Like sometimes I think we describe things, like, especially in a family unit, we describe things, we tell a story about something and it's neat and clean and we never examine it. When we get older, we look at it and we're like, well, is that really the way it was? Like we all tell each other, like, we're a hardworking family and everything we do is great, or whatever we tell each other. And I think I told myself that I was just not handling things. I don't know. I blamed myself somehow for a lot of the issues I had. And now I look back and go, well, there was a lot of stuff going on. And I look at it more, I ask myself, well, what do I think, in a way that I didn't before? It's very powerful what you said. Yeah, very powerful.
That's it right there. Yeah.
So I'm so happy I had this. I feel like it was just such a gift to talk to you, and we got to go all over the place. But I also feel really happy to share your information with my listeners in the show notes. I'm going to, how is the best way to get your book? I wanted to mention that.
Yeah, it's currently available on Amazon or at barnesandnoble.com.
Good.
And so you can order it there. If you'd also like a signed copy and a little bonus gift inside, you can go to our website, moresoulsessions.com, and buy the book right from there, and we'll send it right to you.
Okay, so I'm going to put that in that moresoulsessions.com. Good. Signed copy would be fun. And that was a great, great interview. I can't even thank you enough.
Oh, thank you. You're a natural at this. I love chatting with you.
Well, I really like it.